Firstly, in the very short time I have a huge story to tell, but I must be brief and to the point as the chairman wanted. Come straight to the point. Africa at the moment is in a situation of stranded resources. Wherever you look, there are stranded resources. And from our point of view, the main thing is to try and move those stranded resources. If I give you some examples, there's the 20 megatons of coal per annum must be moved in the short term out of the Zambezi Valley for the TET projects there. In the long term, who knows, 100 MTPAs, megatons per annum. And at the moment, the center line can do 3. In fact, just a few months ago, the center line it was unfunctional. In fact, some of the companies had to declare force majeure because they just could not export. Then you have the other project with the Vale. There are actually 4 lines, rail lines, being planned for extraction of that coal. And so this is one very graphic example, and it's very urgent. And I'd like to say as well that, especially after the PIDA and PC talk, is that if these projects don't see the light of day, for whatever reason, with all the hype that is existing at the moment, the investment climate for Africa will dim. It's imperative that these projects happen. Another one, the copper in the northwest province of Zambia, the new copper belt, where they're looking at taking it out to Lubito. You'll notice that what I'm talking about on transport here is rail, rail, rail. Rail is extremely important now. And it's a very capital intensive, of course, high cost. You've got another story, you've got Mamabula. I can throw a lot of projects at you. I live, eat, sleep projects, so that's where I'm coming from. But that's what I do for a living. But I was in Botswana just 2 weeks ago, and the conundrum we have over moving Botswana's coal, are we going to take it to Tekabonini in Mozambique? Are we going to take it to Walvis Bay on the Trans-Kalahari corridor at $1 to $2 million per kilometer of new rail line? A lot of money. And then another thing, you can't talk about rail without talking about bulk handling facilities at ports. What are you going to do when it lands? So the two things go hand in hand with that. So rail, I can talk about another. I've just been in Guinea-Conakry recently, where you've got some of the biggest iron ore deposits in the world in Simandou. The government insists that the railway line goes through, understandably, through Guinea-Conakry territory, but the shortest line is to Port Buchanan in Liberia. So, you know, what is going to happen now? So it's having huge effects because we're getting the phenomenon now of private infrastructure whereby groups like Vale from Brazil are funding the lines, and it's changing the modalities of infrastructure funding. This is what's happening. It's not a theory. What I also need to mention as well is airports. There's a huge emphasis on airports these days. There's also, sorry, I should have said under rail as well, a new thing that's getting in more focus right now, like in places like Nairobi, for example, is mass public transport systems, as happening in Lekki, in Nigeria, and so on. So that's another thing. Last comment I'd like to make is, I could go on for ages, but the last comment I'd like to make is, it's not always huge mega projects. I did a study on the North-South corridor, you know, that which we should be mentioning quite a lot here because $2 billion pledged in Lusaka and we want to see action. When I went to Mozambique, it was very interesting to see that smaller projects also have a role to play here because the way the Mozambique strategy works is it's most of their corridors are running east-west, if you think of it, Maputo corridor, Beira, Nacala, and so on. Now, there are link roads, smaller link roads that can integrate the country that are very important. And lastly, we've got to get over this problem of regional projects. You know, there was a problem with the Vale line because it cuts through Malawi. Okay, that problem seems to have dissipated somewhat with certain changes happening in Malawi, but nevertheless, why does Guinea-Conakry not want to run the line out through Liberia? It's something that we in business bump our heads against, is the lack of regional cooperation or will to do that. So in the short time I have, I hope I've at least just sketched a bit of the scene. Thank you.
What about shipping lines? What about ports?
There's one thing to do with Pemba. I've been visiting Pemba quite a lot recently. It's a major growth point. In fact, that's what we're doing, concentrating on exponential growth points, like Lake Albert in Uganda when it eventually gets going, and so on. On the east side, the shipping becomes extremely interesting on the east side of Africa, on the gas story, because there is no world price for gas. And the gas price being paid out of Asia now is in about $14 a unit compared to $5 in the West. So it's very lucrative to look at export in that regard. And for the future, with these massive gas finds, which are not only in Pemba, but across the border in Mtwara, it's the same resource, it's Ruma Basin. And I was in Mtwara recently. So that eastern coastal shipping line is very important. The other thing to talk about is the long East African coastline, and some of the forwarding companies got clever. Like, for example, AMT and others are starting almost like milk trains going up the coast. Because during the war, civil war in Mozambique, the Frelimo were often supplied from the ports because it was too difficult to go over and dangerous to go overland. So the whole idea of small coastal shipping solving our problem has become quite a focal point now, as I see it. And that's, I've had discussions with AMT and others, not Bolloré is also looking at that big time. And then finally, I'd just like to say the shipping companies and so on are also very much involved as concession holders of the ports, like Cornelda in Beira and Grindrod in Maputo. Grindrod is pushing Maputo big time at the moment. It's one of my clients. And Transnet, of course, is pushing Richards Bay very much. So there's a bit of a scramble. There are more questions than answered right now. But the shipping companies who have the concessions for some of the ports are playing a really important place.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.